for your lovely introduction. I think this is really one of the most inspiring introductions that I have heard. Rather than reading the bio, you talk about letters. And I think the D definitely resonates with the work that I have done and I'm interested in doing. And it's interesting the way that you put it, because it's D has so many connections. Was like, oh yeah, I have never thought about it that way. Okay, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really delighted to share some of my recent and past work with you, especially around the speculation and experimental qualitative research. It's something that fuels me and gives me a lot of vitality and energy to work in the academia, which can be quite a depressing place occasionally. So I think when you do experimental and speculative and creative work, it gives you resources and energy to push through the other things that comes with this job. Okay, so just a little note for those who don't know me, I'm from Finland, so I want to always greet everybody in Finnish, so tervetuloa, and if somebody speaks Finnish, that's fabulous. And I will discuss some unthinkable methodological futures of the experimental and speculative qualitative research in this. I have prepared a little paper and a couple of activities. So I will be reading and talking, and then I hope that we engage in a really productive discussion. I'm going to put my timer on because I can talk about this a long time. It's a big passion of mine. But let me share the screen so you can follow some of my thoughts that I have also. Oh, I need to share the sound. I already practiced this, but now I don't. Hold on, gotta close this and share again. I have to do that. All right. Sorry. So I need to go and open my PowerPoint again. For some reason, it keeps closing that. So now we'll try one more time. Here we go. Okay, and then I'll put the presentation mode on. Oh, it doesn't need to. Oh, yeah. All right. So let's start with the rapidly changing world. So the world that we currently live in, it includes many health and environmental crises, and therefore it calls for diverse and speculative and continuously changing methodological approaches. I will talk about the creativity in this process and collective responsibility and sustainability of inquiry. And the sustainability especially is something that I have been thinking as a methodological footprint. And I will address that as the last part of my talk. So when the world is highly complicated and complex where we live in, and it has these layers and different perspectives, politics, various kind of economies, ecologies, and multiplicity, which is always there, it's a challenging place to do work. And it is somewhat disheartening to see that the richness of this complexity is often reduced to factors and correlations, numbers, themes, normative discourses, and also sameness. From my perspective, it is not enough that we address this shifting complexity via past and existing tools and approaches. We also need tools to meet the needs of the new, infinitively complex problem space. We need to think what it means and what does it take and how it's possible to engage in a methodological work that builds on diversity, including neurodiversity, and neurodiversity as a baseline. and difference as a celebrated space for relationality and relating. And therefore, I'm kind of encouraging us to think, what might the thinkable and unthinkable methodological futures of experimental and speculative qualitative research do? And this is the first provocation. I'm kind of all right. I'm going to leave you with that thought. One challenge with any inquiry and when teaching future generations of qualitative researchers has to do with this futuristic thinking. In many ways, we need to move beyond our methodological pasts while still being informed by them and critically evaluate what are the challenges and methodological dilemmas of the future. Often we are willing to learn the processes of inquiry, hoping that now we know and master methods. However, our responsibility as a methodologist and informed users of methods does not end there. We also need to vision methodological futures and tomorrow, the next year, that anticipate how the following decades may offer many unthinkable methodological possibilities and challenges. In some ways, all inquiries ideally function as inquiries for the future, and such they cannot be cannot operate without unconventional and wild thinking. Methodological presence, meaning current methods, strategies, approaches, techniques, is shaping what we know, but they should not be limiting how we might know and do differently in the future. This pulling force between the known and the unknown and the past and futures and so on also marks a distinction between knowing and becoming methodologically. Furthermore, how could we adapt methodologically to fit our future vision of equitable and worth lives for all, meaningful and responsible relationality across cultural, political, and economic landscapes, and vision futures through sustainable ecologies, both at the local and the global scale? And furthermore, who is entitled to vision and revision qualitative for futures? And who is given the task to try out and experiment and with innovative methods? How does the global South, for example, participate in these creations? And how do indigenous scholars conceptualize wonder and materiality of inquiry? How do Sami people, for example, that are in the northern part of Finland who live there, how might they sing their ontologies and sense their data? Furthermore, the relationality and empathy, they are necessary conditions for methodological futuristic thinking, since the futures are shaped by relationships researchers form within their worlds. Ecologies matter, and matter matters, and mattering matter. Relationality is a kind of this exchange, mattering movement between elements. It's a force between the species, enabling scholars to create the ways they may know, be, and become. Relational methodologies enable scholars to hesitantly function in the middle and begin wherever they are and their participants are. I'm also thinking relationality and relating beyond the human. These kind of material spaces decenter human, relate to the companion species and other material realities that surround us every day. There's potential in other and the unknown, and I think it's unrealized potential in many ways. For example, some qualitative researchers sense their belongings with the earth. They vision ways they may carry the responsibility of ecological crisis differently, And they may even relate to the less familiar species like moths, viruses, and dust. We could think about relationality as an ecological task and a part of speculative yet material eventhood. Furthermore, relationality for me is always related to the ethics and responsibility. Here I'm drawing from the Haraway and responsibility. I think the qualitative researchers should be capable to be responsive and to negotiate and see beyond their own perspectives, beyond the individual, and think about collective values and collective forms of living. Collective concerns and importance of the shared lives, it foregrounds the sustainable and equitable futures. Qualitative researchers, they need capability to respond to the ethical and responsible, respond ethical and responsible ways. I think it's important also that we vision practices and lives that are still to come and become. Furthermore, to move towards creative ways of inquiring and becoming with inquiry in its all forms, speculation is enormously helpful technique, but it's really hard to do. One needs to see and go beyond oneself and the familiar. One ought to think with half-baked ideas and risky opportunities. And one is often called to follow the path that leads to the unknown. In the context of qualitative inquiry, scholars could utilize what-if frameworks, scenario building. They could build in endlessly varied and open-ended methodological engagements and promote different forms of anticipation, crowdsourcing, flash mobs, speculative art, and so on, to collectively imagine these alternative pathways and structures. What if interviews had no sound? Visual materials were studied through touch, and companion species would co-design inquiries, or research was focused on the care rather than data collection. How might we anticipate data and promote transformation via participant-driven flash mobs? Sorry. Now I'll give you a little another break. And now I'm asking you to relate to the breath. It is important to acknowledge that a speculative approach is only one approach among many, and these kind of research approaches might not be suitable for theoretical orientations based on stability and certainty of knowledge and being. Uncertainty related to speculative approaches might also be perceived as a potential threat to methodological status quo, past and existing methodological traditions. However, in my own scholarship, I draw to speculative affordances and possibilities. Speculative possibilities and wanderings may take many forms, and speculative practice utilize different theoretical and conceptual orientations and potentially conflicting realities, sometimes independent of thought. Some speculative practices generate opportunities to think beyond the human known, the similar, recognizable, and predictable, theoretically drawing from scholars who rethink human relationality and relationship to matter. Some scholars utilize speculations. They foreground the world of subjects, such as exemplified, for example, in Melasso's speculative materialism. Harman's object-oriented philosophy and Bennett's vital and vibrant materiality are some other examples. Speculative practices also take other forms and other turns, bringing together eventhood, relationality, and attunement, put forward, for example, in a Whitehead's process philosophy and Masumi's affect theory. In some ways, speculation can offer a hesitant response to the complex relational material certainty. Furthermore, methodologies that speculate, they play and experiment, they shift, they invent problems and ask questions about the possibilities and these what ifs that I have already mentioned. In addition, many speculative methodologies operate with the discursive, the corporeal, aesthetic, affective, and they often coordinated by transcending traditional methods in some ways. Research approaches that speculate, they wonder, yet they do not verify. They don't offer fixed solutions or pretend to understand the other and the different. Instead, they may care, connect, and create educated guesses and various scenarios of possibility, building on the exploratory, imaginative, and visionary powers of speculation. For example, Puig de Bella Casa referred caring as a speculative mode. Speculative inquiry might emerge from the collective subjects, immanent concepts, and relational objects urgently functioning as a crisis, pause, hesitation, horror, revolt, and the material effects of these processes. I also see speculation shifting from the methodological possibility towards methodological potential. I'm drawing from Kuhn's work. This shift could enable scholars to move beyond the expected borders of the possible and thinkable methodologies and see the unforeseen potential to produce knowledge and practices differently. All methods and methodological approaches have transformative potential, which, however, is not all actualized. Furthermore, messy, inventive methods and various forms of slow and material experimental qualitative research could offer examples to think methods and inquiry differently. Much of my work the past 15 years have focused on experimental and creative forms of inquiry and methodology, addressing the Ds, like data, conferencing, knowing, analysis, materiality, and many more things. For methodologies without experimentation, creativity, and without this kind of wild thinking, they are methodologies of the norm and the repetition, and also, in a way, boredom for me. Creativity brings vitality, and it produces surprise and wonder, and it makes me hesitant and humble about the next steps or processes and the new directions. Hesitant also is about the next relations and the others to come. Creativity doesn't necessarily produce and create, but advances feeling alive in between and within the interval. Creativity is making felt what is too often overlooked and too close. And this is from what Whitehead is also arguing. For me, experimental methodologies operate as a continuous relational decision. It's a movement and performance, and onto-epistemological events which construct different forms of copies of individuals and differentiations and their surroundings. Oftentimes, experimental methodologies mark forces relating to space, time, creation, scale, power, and so on. And created conceptual framings are used to critique and resist the essentialist turn in the contemporary research, which often carefully selects the represented perspectives and voices. The work of Manning, for example, and Sense Lab is a one-levelly example of performative and ontological shifts in methodology. Thinking inquiry as a thought in the act or concepts as events in making being puzzled by the politics of touch or minor gesture. They have plenty to offer methodologically, and they serve as a really productive propositions. For Manning and others, sense are techniques towards the individualization, and to sense is always to sense anew, something which combines repetition and difference. Manning also talks about the body space-time, which is changing, relational, and cannot be known, but can be activated. So these bodily experiments are composed of expression, effect, and different concepts. A few years back, my colleagues and I, we organized a working group, an experimental workshop focusing on methodologies of darkness and dark time. The forest mutation of darkness experiment, similar to transgender Typee River in the work of Povinelli, enabled thisness and simultaneous experimental destination and departure. During one night gathering, scholars experimented with darkness in the rainy Finnish forest. We had an intention with insight alongside the forest to topple the anthropocentrism by bringing qualitative methodologies to trees, darkness, and absence of sight. Forest was not independent of scholars, nor did it form a simple context for scholarly inquiry. Forest produced more. It produced this dark time and scholarly bodies that were sensing the time. A forest was there to witness us wondering what happened to qualitative methodologies, theories, senses, and how did we connect? We as scholars connected to the trees and moss, and wet raindrops. During this gathering, we spent a lot of time experimenting, inquiring, sensing, and experiencing together. We talked and documented, reflected, co-wrote, and extended, invented ways to know without a sight. The forest also became an exploratory playground for dark time and dark time play. Each of the scholars came to the forest prepared to lead one of the forest experiment and activity that had to do with knowing and methodology. These activities had no time or space boundaries, and they utilized bodies and sounds and textures, shadows, storytelling, sensing, and so on. Things that were found and located in the forest. And then I have my last provocation, encouraging you to listen slowly. With my colleagues, we have also done conferencing differently. For example, during one of our conference presentations, which we called an autopsy event, we offered audience and presenters opportunities to engage in immersive collaborative co-performance in the range of grouping creative assemblages, and we called those as autopsy stations. positioned throughout the conference room. A series of research creation experiments in this space, assembled at the conference, in which autopsy-like practices were designed as a conceptual and methodological gaze, focusing on human, non-human relations and various ways to be and know in academic space. Autopsy tables were a site of epistemological reassembly, of putting together methodological thoughts, senses, and practices, rather than, and as well by cutting apart. Presenters were distinguishable from audience by white contamination suits and masks, which made participants both anonymous to audience and only noticeable to each other by their different body shapes. 9 different autopsy practices created the and composition of the body of the human researcher scholar, each time differently. Finally, I want to talk about how methodologies create an impact and various expected and unexpected effects. This work is a part of the collaborative effort that's very recent, and we have been thinking with the concept of the methodological footprint. We propose that all methodologies create a footprint, like a carbon footprint. The concept of ecological footprint has been used a lot in environmental studies to guide decision-making related to sustainability and human consumption. According to McManus and Fulton, for example, ecological footprint measures the impact of the consumption and subsequent waste discharge, including a consumption of food, housing, transportation, consumer goods, and services, by converting impact variables into the single unit of land. The ecological footprint metrics evaluates the actual pressure put on nature by human consumption habit and action. Design and implementation of new methodologies create resources and require resources and funding, and these resources are not equitably distributed on a global scale. Therefore, qualitative researchers should be kind of concerned also with the ecological uses of methodologies. Like the excessive use of energy resources, potentially unnecessary production of new data, information, and evidence should not be regarded as unproblematic, let alone virtuous. Rather, qualitative researchers, funding agencies, and other bodies that evaluate research should question whether new data, information, and evidence are needed and at what cost. It might also be necessary to consider how one might increase data recycling, data sharing, open access, and other ecological ways of supporting shared knowledge and monitoring excessive data production. Therefore, I argue that more ecological uses of methodologies, research resources, and knowledge distribution, especially in context of data collection and knowledge creation, would be needed. Similar to the excessive use of energy and resources and potentially unnecessary production of new data, evidence should not be regarded as unproblematic. How can we describe and potentially measure epistemologically sustainable research and methodology? Who decide what needs to be measured, by whom, when, and why, when considering ecological footprint of knowledge production? When situating ecological footprint in the context of methodology, it is important to note that methodological footprint is more than the methodological impact. Methodological footprint is concerned with the lasting and potentially unforeseen impacts of locally and culturally situated choices and methodological choices. Human use of research and research consumption beyond a collective need can be highly problematic, since these forces can create uneven global costs, benefits, geographical and social impacts. Ecosystems that support local research are often beyond strict national geographical borders. The ecological footprint's linear metabolism of cities and land is turned into the metabolism of research design and methodology in our work. We need to reduce the cost of research to other people and other ecosystems. Consumption patterns and values should be part of the methodological conversation and consideration. What and who is this data and knowledge for? What energy is depleted for the generation and its metabolism? Is this data worth it? Less frequently, qualitative scholars consider the potential actual cost of their research at the local and global scale. Even more rarely do research consider the wider ecological, social, and ethical impact of the inquiries. Any discussion of research as a process that requires personal and material resources, capital, is often a function of knowledge and power wrapped up in the politics of education and research. Publication, job searches, tenure and promotion, and other political yet embodied aspects of the academy. A larger methodological footprint can be driven by the field's need for the progress and disciplinary development in the academic marketplace, where only specific and similar ideas are supported and funded. I draw from Masumi's methodological excess and surplus value of knowledge, which serve as the engine of capitalism. Excess of research ideas in the academic marketplace often offer endless opportunities for knowledge proliferation and multiplication, which profits business and academic enterprises. Knowledge capitalism and academic capitalism illustrate close connection between academic knowledge production and global markets, which in turn benefit from the larger methodological footprints. The results are a positive feedback loop. More research and knowledge produce even more knowledge and profit, which requires more research and knowledge. Similarly, Prunila and Hannukainen proposed that research projects, especially funded projects, rely on market orientation to be functioning, enabling and regulating knowledge production and processes. Under academic capitalism, research approaches and methodologically ideas advance certain political goals, such as unified and easily and externally evaluated research, seemingly flexible yet streamlined data collection processes and profitable data banks, and simplified approaches to research designed to justify political decisions. Demands of academic capitalism accompany endless accumulation and developments in private research contexts and organizations, efficiency of research time and centralization of publication and research services, decision-making by research proxies and representatives. How do these forces impact the methodological footprint? What can the methodological footprints do to disrupt academic capitalism? The notion of ecological footprint in the context of qualitative inquiry brings forward multiple questions and possibilities. Qualitative research could consider how to approach scholarship and knowledge production that is more sustainable, the ways that are also collectively responsible. We might need to consider the ecological responsibilities and research approaches that illustrates the principles of sustainability, companion-based inquiries, and ecological research designs that consider costs, access, distribution, and equity. Some scholars, as Stengers and Almer, have advocated for slow science to counter academic capitalism and acceleration of excess knowledge. To slow down or yield to academic capitalism and work within its demands is also a spade choice. Escobar and other South American scholars who work on the pluriverse have different choices. How much slowing down and collective ownership and authorship change methodological footprint? If so, what do results look like? These slowing down correctives, undoing this qualitative inquiry, they are an important part in the history of field, as decades of writing, thinking and arguing have resulted in power politics and social justice being introduced and reintroduced into qualitative research design. They set the stage for qualitative inquiry to think the unthinkable. However, at the same time, and always, they run the risk of becoming streamlined, homogenized, and territorialized. Striving for a smaller methodological footprint could mean qualitative researchers open up to diverse and unseen possibilities, as repeatedly collectively revisioned and positioned and repracticed. It could also mean that acquiring grant agencies and funders to reconsider their seamlessly endless need for new data. Methodological footprint is a plus, whose addition to methodological thinking moves qualitative research away from the forces of knowledge production and consumption towards ecological knowledge sharing and recycling, with the potential to renew, repair, and heal potentially unhealthy ecologies of research. Speculative and experimental research example indicate a shift from methodology being in the service of knowledge production towards methodological methodologies that create different ontologies, that build different unthinkable constellations of concepts and practices. And it might mean more just realities and worlds that are studied in different spaces and through different means, senses, experiences, and so on. Within this renewed methodological purpose, worlding and the world making becomes foregrounded, since the world is no longer stable, predictable, and completely known. These kinds of world-making methodologies are simultaneously nowhere and everywhere, hopefully producing knowledge and stimulating curiosity among us and the worlds that we study. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shall I, first of all, stop recording so everyone could freely